Fathers, ladies and gentlemen, I have three good news for you. I'm the last. My speech will be not so large, and I'll try to speak slowly. The internet and the actual ecclesiastical journalism. The major goal of this communication is not to talk exclusively about the specifics of the internet, but about the internet integrated in the bigger field of ecclesiastical journalism. For the main question from an Orthodox standpoint is not finally about the form of journalism, but about the content of it. Of course, the internet itself has some particular notes, not so easy to accept and promote through an Orthodox perspective, but the problems raised by the internet are not more difficult than the ones raised, for example, by the television, among other forms of ecclesiastical journalism. There is a theological discussion about each form of journalism, for there are differences between them. But once a form of journalism is adopted for ecclesiastical use, then it could not be criticized, that mode of journalism, in case it falls into demagogy. To formulate the purpose of this communication, I shall begin with a statement written in the primary text of this conference, where it was mentioned that web pages which, in one way or another, are concerned with pastoral care should not be overweening. When pastoral care is enacted via digital media, it must be alive. It must offer life, not just text or other things. How can this be achieved? Close the quotation. This is a question applying for all forms of ecclesiastical journalism. How could they offer life? For some people, this question might not be necessary, since their aim is probably how to extend the forms of journalism as an activity of the overall ecclesiastical missionary movement. But if we will try a deeper research about this journalism through the question mentioned above, how could they offer life, we will see that the many written contexts are very poor and weak, although being very rich quantitatively. Of course, I speak based on the experience with the context created in the Romanian space, so I couldn't provide a general view. But the question still remains: what needs to happen so that all forms of the ecclesiastical journalism, including this one, could offer life? The features of the actual ecclesiastical journalism. Firstly, in the case of ecclesiastical journalism, this is strongly linked with the character or type of the contextual ecclesiastical framework. The words promoted in these areas will reflect the main mentality occurring here. Without wishing to develop now some ecclesiastical reflections suitable for our times, I have to say that if the main mentality is given by a form of ecclesiastical institutionalism, then the words of the journalism naturally will reflect that mentality. As Professor Mantaridis said, when the Church presents itself more inflexible and with some anachronisms, when its charismatic and eschatological perspective are compressed up to the form of an earthly organization, then the testimony given in this kind of ecclesiastical context could not be a positive one, this also or mainly being reflected in the social or political arenas. The words expressed in these communication frameworks will not have spirit within them, thus will not provide spirit. Instead, they will create a substitute for a real and true testimony, promoting new standard languages such as this: the mission of the Church, missionary activity, pastoral mission, and so on. As a new particularity of our times, all these are coupled with European programs or projects to obtain even a material support for these activities called ecclesiastical. If within the Church there is no natural and vital tension to mold the world in an ecclesiastical shape, if the current mentalities and practices will continue to be adopted, then the words expressed through internet or any other form of communication will reflect nothing than a kind of empty language promoting the cult of the image about self, hence casting shadow over the real context of the Church. Of course, in this way, the ecclesiastical journalist could not offer life. In fact, this approach has currently produced and spread an objective or impersonal language, which is very present in the journalism referred to. This journalism is abundant in such content. Otherwise, the impersonality and conventionalism of the language takes dictatorial form in most of the official dialogues of our days, out what I know but disagree with. For instance, Heidegger began the fight against the numbness of the philosophy of his time with the problem of the sterile and repetitive language. Nonetheless, this reality shall not be an excuse to accept and expose this mode of speaking in the ecclesiastical frameworks. On the contrary, it ought to be a major or maybe even first concern about the value of the ecclesiastical word and not about the amount of this word or about the ways to spread more efficiently the words. And the internet, through its easier mode of being generated, brings forth the enticement to give attention especially at the spreading. Thus, despite the growth of the number of the Orthodox messages sent via classical media and internet, I don't think that there was any impact or change on the situation or status of the personal or social life. More than that, as an example from Romania, since a couple of years there is a television, radio and newspaper of the Church with national coverage. At the same time, the public trust in the Church is going down by the opinion polls. And the public and social life in Romania are more dominated by corruption and other social wrong attitudes and behaviors. Therefore, the Christian Orthodox word today needs more than the interest about how to more efficiently promote and spread it. Its first step shall be, in fact, to produce and create this word. It could be the fact that there is a high need to researching and identifying some methodological elements for this purpose. That is what I will try to do. The methodological data for an Orthodox journalist. Firstly, there is the problem of the motivation of ecclesiastical journalism. Very often this question, it is passed over. It is a given aspect, not a research one. Through the standard language I had mentioned before, with expression as mission of the Church, pastoral mission, information, projects, and so on, the motivation is something already made, accepted. It has no need to be researched or understood. Here, in this lack of the concern about the motivation, it rests the first failure to produce a word aiming to achieve life. The real motivation should be a continuous reflection process, not something which is already given by someone else. There is an inner state of the person who tries to elaborate an ecclesiastical word. And this motivation must be a single one or before all others. The direct relation to and with God. The written word, as the spoken one too, is an act offered to God Himself. This ontological status of the word to be constructed is very often forgotten. In our rich and complex orthodoxy, there is the risk to lose the content via remaining within the exterior forms, especially when our understanding about the Church is more objective or impersonal and institutional. The words produced according to these understandings will be, of course, reproducing standard words, unable to bring real situation of life. And the necessity to search about the motivation is a personal act of the person who is reading the ecclesiastical word, irrespective of the level of his or her position. That is, even in a journalist framework where there is a board and a direction given by this board, the act to write or to speak, the motivation of this act should remain personal. Of course, this is not an easy situation, as ideally every real act in Orthodoxy might need to be assumed personally, and the becoming process of the search about the motivation will be the main feature of this personal act. Towards the full life of the words. The searching about the real motivation in the act of reading or speaking sets for the possibility to construct differently the word, which may become richer ontologically. After the finding of the real motivation, the second step is the personal participation at the realities which are written or spoken about. Any attempt to have a personal and becoming relation with the realities turns to be very important in order not to be left at the exterior of them. As I had told before, although we have a large spread of the ecclesiastical word, the real effects are so little, partly because there is a great inflation of words without value and without spirit in them. As it is true, the true perspective of the economy, perhaps we need a periodic time of deflation to purify the reality of speaking and reading in our case, putting aside what is not good. There are two ways of being exterior versus the word expressed. The first is to promote the official and standard languages used in the institutionalized ecclesiastical surroundings. About this I had already spoken, but there is another kind of exteriority. When very good texts, like those from Holy Fathers or from Philokalia, or for example from modern and contemporary holy authors, are reproduced without the attempt of a direct confrontation of the very person who proposed the text with the realities described in those texts. There ought to be a personal process to participate in the realities which are learned and then offered to the others. These words will be very hardly bring life in those who receive them, if not being alive, at least in part, in the person who expresses them in the journalistic word. It is not so hard to reproduce by internet a word told by a most venerated monk or by a famous and good theologian. But this word has more relevance for the receivers if it will come after a personal confrontation took place within the person proposing it. Through internet, for example, the name of the author disappears, as well as the individual take of the responsibility of the text proposed and offered, and of the dimension in which the classical journalist must be reading. I did not say that the words in ecclesiastical journalism must be assembled only by the holy persons. What I wanted to set forth is that the personal participation of the sender of the text to the realities described in that text is very necessary, even if this comprises just basic attempts. Different degrees are possible in this becoming process. Besides this, another inner state is also important to exist and to happen. The dearly wishing after those realities to be lively realities of his own existence. In this communication, I have just tried to sketch some aspects regarding the manner in which the Orthodox word proposed in the journalistic forms today, audio, television, classical reading, or internet, could become more real and to create new personal realities and, why not, even social realities. Thank you.